Welcome to our Integrated Pest Management Academic Seminar Series, which is designed to increase awareness of new research and techniques that advance IPM and its adoption in all types of management settings. These seminars are once a month during the academic year, and you can find the upcoming seminars as well as our other events like our What's Bugging You First Friday series on our website, which I'll link to in the chat. Now it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Caroline Bragdon, who has worked in urban public health at the city, state, and federal level for over 25 years. Ms. Bragdon currently serves as the Director of Neighborhood Interventions for the Pest Control Services team at the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. Ms. Bragdon works to develop and improve neighborhood-level responses to rat infestation and is developing case studies for pest management planning at the neighborhood and at the building level. She received her bachelor's in community health and social psychology from Tufts University and her master's in public health from Johns Hopkins University. Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here today to talk about our neighborhood rat reduction program here in New York City, and more specifically, how we approach IPM at the neighborhood level. And I will try to keep my presentation as concise as possible so that we have plenty of time for questions and comments at the end. I'm going to jump right into it, if that's okay.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Thank you. So I'm going to start today to talk a little bit about how we approach IPM. And I think usually I start this talk by saying, I'm sure many people here are very familiar and comfortable doing IPM at the building level or at the level of a farm or a garden. But when you think about doing IPM at the level of an urban neighborhood, it becomes kind of a bigger landscape, right? A more complicated ecology with many differing areas that you have to think about. So that's what we've been kind of grappling with here in New York City. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our approach, some of the challenges that we've had, and then some of the modifications that we've made over the years. So first of all, our approach to neighborhood level IPM programming for rats is to do rat inspections throughout entire neighborhoods routinely. So the foundation of our program is routine and repeated rounds of inspections in the neighborhoods that we serve. Our intervention includes elements of community engagement and education, interagency coordination. We have city programming that we offer, direct interventions, and then legislation. And I'm going to spend a good bit of today talking about the legislation work that we've done. The programming, we focus on managing rats through waste reduction. So that's the main orientation of the program. We use enforcement as a primary tool, and then also city agency referrals. We have a team that we call the stoppage team that seals up holes and cracks that allow the free movement of rats. We do a lot of infrastructure repair, and then we use treatment as the last resort. The Neighborhood Rat Reduction Program is a City Hall program. It was launched back in 2017 by our former mayor, Mayor de Blasio. And it funded the health department, Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, my agency, along with several other agencies, to focus on reducing rat activity at the neighborhood level by attacking the environmental factors that contribute to rats. So basically food sources and available habitats, again, at the neighborhood level, not at the property level. Our plan focused on reducing rat activity in city-owned spaces, so public housing, urban parks, and urban public schools. We found that through previous inspectional programs that these types of properties tend to be the biggest drivers of rat activity in a neighborhood. We also coupled this approach with increased enforcement on private properties to ensure compliance on the private property level. Our neighborhood rat reduction program chose to focus on areas of the city with the highest burden of rat infestation. And when we started, that was 3 areas, one in Brooklyn, one in Lower Manhattan, and one in the Bronx. And we've since expanded. So again, the strategies that we use, first and foremost, are grounded in inspection. So always inspect before you intervene. We do routine proactive inspections. That's called rat indexing. We do enforcement on properties that fail for rat activity. And then we do interagency coordination on public properties that are found to be rat active or have conditions that may be attracting rats. We've worked across the city agencies to reduce rats' access to food. So we do training for city agency staff that are on site, say at public housing or a public school, to containerize their waste, to clean frequently, to reduce access to food waste. We've spent a lot of money on rodent resistant containers and a lot of time evaluating those containers. And we promote larger waste management strategies like New York's Zero Waste Plan. We also have what we call the stoppage team. And we have a stoppage team here at the health department. And then there's also a stoppage team that works out of the housing authority, public housing. And then there's elements of stoppage that happen in both parks and public schools. My team, the stoppage team here at the health department, we focus on areas of the city like hollow sidewalks, tree pits, community gardens, and then of course garbage containers. Our team does use treatment as a strategy. We have exterminators that work for the health department, and they treat with rodenticides when the owner fails to treat. We also use carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide methods to treat, mainly in public spaces like gardens, parks, tree pits, etc. So the other kind of guiding factor in our work is that we do evaluation as we go. So we are constantly monitoring our key performance indicators as we go through the program. And we have several indicators that we report very publicly. We share our data with the public on our Rat Mitigation Zone website. We also make most of our data available through the Open Data website. And I spend a lot of time talking to academics, especially journalism students, because everyone loves a good rat story, about how to look at our data, how to understand our data, and how to do their own analysis. Our key indicators focus on the initial inspections, so the number of inspections that we do and the failure rate. So we do large numbers of inspections, so it's a very robust data set. We look at the failure rate by neighborhood. So you can take, say the 4,000 properties in the Lower East Side and calculate a failure rate. You can do that in rounds. So we do a round of inspections every 6 months and then compare that failure rate over time. We look at the number of enforcement orders that we send, but we also look at the number of city agency referrals that we have to send. So if a city property fails inspection, we're not doing enforcement. What we're doing is we're referring that issue to the agency and then tracking whether or not they're able to follow up. On private properties, we do compliance inspections after we've ordered the owner of the property to abate their rat issues, and then we can issue summons. So we track the number of summons that are issued, and then the number of times that we have to elevate that enforcement because of non-compliance by the property owner. A lot of people are familiar with the 311 complaint system. It is an imperfect indicator. 311 complaints are more likely to occur in gentrified neighborhoods, and thus greatly skew what looks like a rat problem. And people who rely entirely on 311 complaints are often given a skewed version of where the rats are. We really prefer failure rate on inspection because that is kind of guaranteed accuracy and not just showing where the people are that like to complain to 311. We can look at treatment visits by one of our own health department exterminators. This will tell us where there are non-compliant owners that are failing to fund their own treatments. So then we go in and treat. We look at where and when we've had to do stoppage visits. And then we look at more comprehensive survey data that we collect on parks, public housing, and schools. So when all that data is rolled up, we have a data dashboard that over time we can compare. So we look at the data in snapshots every month. We can see, where where in any given month are the failure rates the highest for rats? Where are we issuing the most summons? Where have we done the most treatments? And where are we receiving the most complaints? So we can look at this every month and kind of make decisions on how, where to focus in the next month. And then we can roll up the data in a 6-month round or in an annual round to kind of understand where we've been having success and where we're failing. Okay, so what I wanted to talk about today is our approach to waste management and really operating under the understanding that, with rats, if you feed them, you breed them. And New York is a challenge when it comes to comprehensive waste management. And yet we know a rat only needs an ounce of food a day to survive, and that the key to reducing rats is limiting their daily access to food, and then also to bringing New Yorkers along with us. So we're not just constantly explaining to people that we can't treat our way out of this, but that really our goal as a city is to think about cleaning up. So when we first started this program, when we were first funded in the early days of neighborhood rat reduction, that was 2017, the landscape of New York that we were concerned about was really first and foremost overflowing public litter baskets throughout the neighborhoods that we were serving. It was also a major issue that New York as a city had decided to store the garbage on the curb overnight in plastic bags, right? This was a routine process in New York where the night at 4 p.m., the night before, garbage was to be picked up. Building supers, custodians, homeowners, porters across the city would place all their garbage, food waste, in plastic bags on the curb, and then it would be picked up the following morning. Since we know that rats feed between dusk and dawn, those of us here in the rat program had been screaming for years, hey, you can't ask us to treat our way out of this, to intervene even, as long as this is a routine practice here in the city. We also have a major litter problem. If you walk down any New York street, you're almost guaranteed to find litter, and especially litter that's kind of in places that have no clear property owner. And tree pits is one of those areas. So tree pits in New York are like mini parks. The tree itself is owned by the Parks Department. The pit is supposed to be managed as part of the sidewalk landscape by the adjacent property owner. But because of this kind of gray area, they typically become no man's land unless somebody chooses to adopt them. And there are lots of wonderful tree stewardship volunteer programs. But in areas that don't have those kinds of programs, we see that tree pits can become a haven for rat infestation. And then the other gray area are just the rest of the city landscape. For example, catch basins and sewers, the hollow voids under sidewalks. These areas, green streets, they often become kind of areas where garbage can accumulate. Food waste may get lodged. They're difficult for humans to access to do an intervention, but they're very easy for rats to access. And these become the areas of concern for rat activity. We have lots of other challenges when it comes to food waste and containerization. New York City has a lot of very beautiful and old buildings. And these buildings didn't traditionally have spaces to store their garbage, right? A lot of the buildings, used to have incinerators. Now that garbage may be stored in a compactor, or it may not. And so as a consequence, many buildings have gotten used to storing their garbage in plastic bags, either in front of the building, in back of the building, or on the curb. And there was never really any clear enforcement on this issue. Compactors are considered a best practice, but they require space and are very expensive to install and maintain. Now, another challenge that we've seen is that sanitation schedules traditionally may not match high foot traffic times. So the trucks need to come through and pick up waste actually on times when there's not a lot of high foot traffic, right? For those trucks to be able to move through, which means that waste is often staged for long periods of time as it waits to be picked up. We were seeing this in parks. We were also seeing this in public housing, where staff would go through and stage garbage where it would sit in a pile and wait to be picked up and brought to landfill. Another New York City specific challenge is that New Yorkers are just not accustomed to recycling. In other areas of the country or even in the world, recycling is a commonplace it's a practice that people are used to doing. They think about, they talk about. In New York, a lot of people were just used to throwing their garbage out, not to separating or sorting waste. Businesses in city, food service establishments are supposed to hire a private carter to move their food waste, to pick it up within an hour of closing. But many small businesses may not spend the money on a private carter. Also, we have a lot of things like food trucks, food vending, that could be illegal, where there's no oversight. If you walk around New York, you can think about all the places you can buy food. At the end of the day, at the end of a shift, where does all that food waste go? A lot of times, unfortunately, it gets dumped. And improper disposal and or illegal dumping are ongoing areas, and especially in areas that may have businesses that are struggling. Finally, we found that city agencies themselves often lack the resources they need to manage their own facilities. So for example, the Parks Department may have one person who's in charge of cleaning and picking up the garbage at, a massive city park. So, as that person circulates throughout the park, there's going to be a constant buildup of waste. Also, traditionally, shifts end at 3:30, and overnight was considered overtime. And so precisely at the time, especially in the summer, when there was the most foot traffic in a park, there would be no staff on site to clean or empty the litter baskets. Okay, so those were the problems. Sounds like ton of problems. But, you know, we were the city's inspectors. So we were going in, we were seeing these problems and trying to develop programming, an IPM program to address the problems. So where did we start? We started with containerization, looking at public litter baskets on the streetscape, in parks, also looking at city infrastructure like large public housing. The New York City Housing Authority has very large apartment buildings, and looking at how each agency contained their waste, and then trying to develop best practices. So we looked at school waste, we looked at housing waste, we looked at parked waste and the containers that they use. We then started introducing new laws to try to legislate good or better trash management, and then introduced programming to try to get at service. So increasing service to move trash out of neighborhoods faster, out of parks faster, and then add evening shifts for cleaning, again, with a focus on city property. The legislation that we proposed, they were called the RAT bills. They were first introduced in 2017. And the first thing we did was we said, okay, putting your garbage on the curb at 4 p.m. when it's not going to be picked up until 6 a.m. the following morning is a real problem. So what if big apartment buildings put their garbage out at 4 a.m. instead? We got really excited about that. And we put it in a law, a proposed law. We also thought, what if we asked large buildings to do organics recycling and separate out their food waste? And then what if food service establishments were required to recycle food waste? And then also we introduced laws that would increase fines for improper waste disposal and illegal dumping. Now, out of all these initial laws, out of these 4 RAT bills, there was only one set that passed, and that was the law to increase fines. All of the others were kind of wholesale rejected by the city. And you know, this is part of New York being New York. Many people are so accustomed to seeing trash that they prefer their own convenience over a cleaner city. But that didn't stop us from playing with some different containers. So we did receive funding in the first couple of years to try to purchase Big Belly solar powered compacting smart bins. And we put these in parks and in areas that were serviced by BIDs, which are business improvement districts. A BID, so we worked with like the Chinatown Partnership in Lower Manhattan. We gave the BID like about 100 Big Bellies. We asked them to service them, and we monitored the neighborhood to see if there was less trash. We thought that this might be a way to introduce a rat-proof container. They are expensive and high need pieces of infrastructure. And what I mean by high need is they get broken down really easily. So they need to be serviced on a regular basis. You know, people will jam them up. You know, we had them get lit on fire, delivery trucks would back into them. So they needed a lot of attention, but we thought the trade-off was enough because they were so effective at keeping rats away from trash. Unfortunately, well, here, I'll just move to the next slide. We also thought that by pairing the Big Bellies with public service announcements around putting your litter in a can and connecting the concept of like rats eat your litter, put your litter in a container. You know, these little things that you can do will help keep your neighborhood rat-free. So we did this big campaign. We put this up in bus shelters. We put this campaign up on every single Big Belly in our high-need neighborhoods, and we put it out there in multiple languages. But unfortunately, this was not very well received. So many communities found this ad campaign to be kind of scary. They didn't really make the connection. They were saying, like, why are you accusing us of feeding rats? It was really kind of an unpopular ad campaign. So after 2 rounds of it, we discontinued the funding and let communities develop their own public service messaging to try to encourage people to put their garbage in a can. We funded these Big Bellies for about 5 years and then discontinued the funding due to the high expense of replacing them and the need for ongoing maintenance. And ultimately, we're hopeful that new, easier to maintain containers will be more usable in the city. A program that has persisted and been sustained is organics collection and recycling. So again, communities throughout the US and throughout the world already do organics recycling and composting, but in New York, this was a very new concept, which is basically that whether you're in your kitchen or in your school, that you would take your food waste, put it in a separate container, and then keep it in that container. So we have brown bins that are just for food waste. And then sanitation would then pick these up in a special truck. And that food waste would be brought off-site to large composting facilities. And then the compost could be brought back into New York City and used in our public parks and community gardens. So this program was also very slow to launch and also had some hiccups. Every time there was a budget cut, the organics program would get cut too. It is hard to implement. So, everyone loves the idea of having organics recycling in schools and teaching children how to recycle properly. People think of it as like kind of a panacea of like, well, what if we get our school children on board to do this? But operationalizing it on a day-to-day basis is challenging. And so, while it exists in many schools, we still see that, we get some of the food waste into the bins, and then a lot of food waste doesn't make it into the bin. We're on the way. It's launched. It exists, but there's a long road in front of us in getting these and getting all food waste into a recycling bin. We also have tried to buy other kinds of containers for food waste. These are called tilt trucks. And the reason they're helpful is because they tilt forward so that a sanitation worker doesn't have to lift the bag and place it down into the can. You can tilt the truck forward and they can pull the bags. These are necessary to protect people's backs when they're doing a full route of school waste, whether it's food waste or regular garbage or recycling. We went in and bought tilt trucks for all the schools in our rat mitigation zone neighborhoods. The challenge really has been the human behavior part. One, getting custodial staff to use them properly, to close the lids, to latch the lids, and 2, making sure that schools actually had enough. We're still seeing this partial containerization issue. We've gone through many iterations of the New York City litter basket. We started with the mesh baskets that you see here on the left. We were saying, oh, well, mesh baskets, they may be easy to service, but they leak. They're highly accessible to rats, and they're basically very prone to overflow. The city tried these bigger 100% steel bins. These also were prone to overflow and would get litter caught in them. Then the city introduced these silver bullets here in the middle. The silver bullets worked much better, but were very expensive to implement. And now there's a new model of lightweight can, again, that is supposed to be easy to service, quick to service, it's less uh, it's less conducive to rats than the original mesh can. You can see the mesh is limited and it's smaller, but rats can still access them. Okay, so I've just talked through a number of the different interventions that we tried, and across those interventions from our launch date of 2017 right up until 2019, right before the pandemic started in 2020, we actually started making quite a lot of progress in the program. We were able to just from focusing on these areas, we were able to decrease the number of earth and rat burrows that were observed in our park surveys. We were able to decrease the number of earth and rat burrows observed in public housing surveys, and we were able to increase the number of public schools that were passing inspection on a monthly basis. We also saw that citywide 311 service requests were starting to come down, and that especially in the rat mitigation zones, 311 requests were kind of rapidly tumbling. So we were excited, getting ready to expand. And this is kind of what it looks like. So these 3 years, 2017, 2018, and 2019, right before the pandemic, we started seeing our failure rates come down very slowly. So in 2016, right before we launched neighborhood rat reduction, our failure rates for rats were around 15% citywide. We were able to bring them back down into the 11% range. And again, you can see the very high numbers of inspections we were doing, like 175,000 inspections a year. And then the pandemic hit. And so in 2020, you can see the number of inspections we were doing started to fall in 2020 and 2021. This was because our program was halted in order for the city to respond to the pandemic. And consequently, you can see the failure rates for rats started shooting up in the over 25% failure rate range. Again, this is the percent of properties failing inspections for any kind of rat activity. And now here's where we are today. We're looking at failure rates still well over double where they were when we first implemented the neighborhood rat reduction program. Okay, so now I'm going to switch and talk a little bit about so what changed. Here we are with a program that we showed was extremely successful. We proved that neighborhood rat IPM was a thing that could work. We proved that that our approach of routine inspections, enforcement, waste containerization, and funding of city programming could result in declines in rat activity. And then the pandemic hit, and all the progress that we made was not only eliminated, but we're now seeing the highest rat activity, especially in 22, 23, that we'd ever seen in New York. So what happened? What happened was the program was suspended. We stopped doing routine inspections and surveys. Enforcement was hugely scaled back. The city suspended street cleaning and also a lot of other kind of like basic cleaning and garbage removal programs. Organics was also suspended. And then also both in the public sector and in the private sector, if you think about what happened in the height of pandemic, is people stayed home. Everyone stayed home, including your pest management staff. Your inspector stayed home, your exterminator stayed home, your cleaning staff stayed home. So if everyone stays home, that's, you can't be surprised that there's a rebound in rats, because rats stayed home too. And then they had lots of babies. And then in this context, we introduced outdoor dining, which was in the beginning of COVID, it was largely unregulated. So outdoor dining was an effort to save the cities kind of economically. We were trying to, the city was trying to assist small businesses in staying open, keep people employed, make New York's economic landscape viable. Thus, the program went unregulated for the first couple of years that outdoor dining existed. And all of the staff, the city workers who were doing the hard work of Neighborhood Rat IPM were reassigned to the COVID response. So this is what changed. This is what changed. And I'm going to talk a little bit through as so in 2022, we started leaving the COVID work and coming back into working in the pest management world back in New York City. And so this is what we came in to see. So outdoor dining, not in every case, but in many of our high-risk rat reduction neighborhoods, were very vulnerable to rats. Partly because they were unregulated, they were built in all kinds of ways, and they were often built in ways that were very conducive to rat burrowing. So rats would get either underneath them or inside of them, and it was really hard to clean. Then also food waste, standing water, other debris would get in these spaces and were very hard to clean. Outdoor dining also really disrupted routine garbage management. There was garbage kind of stored all around outdoor dining. And so there was this garbage harborage moment that was very pronounced in New York in 22 especially. So, we decided as we came back and we were looking at these problems that we wanted to come back in force and leverage this model that we had developed, Neighborhood Rat IPM model, to reduce the rats post-pandemic. And you may have seen the mayor appointed a rat czar, Kathy Karate, who we work with very closely, and she started helping us pull together kind of a blueprint for how we were going to respond. And we pulled out our old tricks, the things that we knew would work, and that was first and foremost to invest in agency waste management, and to really think critically about how we store and stage waste. We also have consistently returned to what we know best, which is that city agencies need to do their part. We manage a lot of property, and we agencies need to do our very best. So whether it's a public park, a public school, or the public housing authority, these agency properties need to lead the way in RAT IPM. They can't look the worst. They have to look the best if we want private properties to follow suit. We started this idea that we would export models of what works well outside of the mitigation zones, because the other thing that we saw is suddenly it wasn't just the rat mitigation zones that had a lot of rat activity. We started seeing rat hotspots popping up all over the city, new areas in Queens, in Brooklyn, in northern Manhattan, in the Bronx, that were suddenly hotspots where people were telling us, we never saw such bad rat activity before. We agreed to expand. We got funding to expand into Harlem. And then there was a new approach with new rat bills introduced. And of course, we continue to evaluate. So we keep going back. We're still doing neighborhood rat indexing. Every 6 months, we inspect everything. We still do city agency surveys. Every month, we're out looking at city properties, and we still monitor 311 complaints. Okay, so now I'm getting to the end here. I'm just going to go through some of the next round of legislation that actually this time we were much more successful passing this legislation. And I think it was because, city council, they were hearing the rat complaints, and you can see there was a lot in the press. rat complaints were high, but it wasn't just complaints. It was citywide failure rates for rat activity were extremely high in 22 and 23. So this is what council passed. First of all, they voted to make rat mitigation zones kind of a permanent thing. So we legislated the idea that rat mitigation zones would be areas where agencies would be told, you got to work together in these spaces to reduce rats. And then the health department issues an annual report on rat mitigation zones. And you can see our report on the website. We're getting ready to post the 2023 report. We also, for the first time ever in New York, required that if you are in active construction site, you must have a pest professional working with you to do inspections and treatment if necessary. Sanitation got a new law where a building, a multifamily building with 2 or more rat violations were now required to invest in rodent-proof containers and would not be allowed to store their garbage in plastic bags in their backyard anymore. And residential and commercial waste, they pushed back the set out time from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. And you'll recall in 2017, we wanted it to be 4 a.m., but they made it 8 p.m. So again, with pickup happening early the next morning. We completely revamped the outdoor dining rules and first and foremost made it enforceable so that now when an inspector saw that an outdoor dining area was heavily rat infested, that we could actually do some enforcement against the restaurant. And multiple agencies worked on updating outdoor dining so that it would be less conducive to rats and other kinds of city violations. And then I think the most noticeable changes that were voted into law were changes around containerization in New York. So residential buildings with 1 to 9 units must now set out their trash in a container, just like the suburbs, right? You put your garbage out in a can. Sanitation services the can. Coming up next year, large buildings will be required to use stationary on-street containers. There's more of that to come, and mid-size units will also have to choose a containerization option. So really, you know, this is a quote from the commissioner from the Department of Sanitation. The changes around garbage management really came out of recognition that for multiple years that you have to get trash and bags off the street and that you have to clean up New York if you want to get rid of rats. We've been talking about this for as long as I've been at the health department. I joined the health department in 2001. But the city just started talking about it in the last couple of years. And I think that's partly because the rat problem became so pronounced after the pandemic. So some of the things that we're doing now. So, you know, the laws were just passed. We still see piles of bags full of trash everywhere. I mean, New York is New York. It's hard to create change. But what you're going to start seeing are these on-site containers. They're taking parking spaces and they're building these like communal dumpsters. They're starting with an area of Harlem called Hamilton Heights. This is around where Columbia University is. And they're building on-street containers where these larger and mid-sized buildings will be required to put their waste. Schools already have them. This is going to be hugely expanded. They have 3 different kinds of containers, one for food waste, one for recycling, and one for regular trash. And again, parking spaces were taken. so that schools would have permanent spaces to store their garbage instead of on the curb. Outdoor dining structures have been radically redesigned. They now come as like a kit of parts. So instead of just letting any restaurant build any structure, they have standards. And so one of the standards is that they all have to have a trap door so you can get underneath them and power wash, inspect, clean. But the other requirement is that they have to be able to be dismantled. So if a dining structure is built on top of a sewer that is rat infested, we can go in and tell them, dismantle this thing and remove it. We need to treat here. And so there's much more authority and oversight in the program that we're hoping will improve things. The other big change is that all structures must come down between November and March so that the city can do snow removal and street cleaning. So I think this is really going to help. They're not going to just be like permanent rat housing on the streets of New York. Okay, so wrapping up, what comes next? We think we're making headway, although the numbers don't yet show sustained declines in failure rate on inspection. We are starting to see some encouraging behavior change, right? We're seeing the dining structures come down. We're seeing containers come up. And we're definitely seeing that other agencies in particular, are grasping this concept of garbage management before treatment. We are continuing to evaluate the program by doing rounds of inspections and surveys, and we're continuing to publish and share data for the public to consume. We've also greatly expanded our education and outreach efforts to get regular New Yorkers on board. You may have seen City Hall's Rat Pack initiative, which is an effort to invite, everyday New Yorkers to join us in our rat prevention, our neighborhood rat IPM efforts, and to become kind of a leader in rat prevention. And we offer a lot of free training through our community-facing Rat Academy. And we continue to also engage with and train other agencies. We meet every month at City Hall to review all the data and to talk with the agencies about where we're seeing hotspots and problems. And then we continue to expand our neighborhood approach to other areas of the city. So as I said, coming out of the pandemic, we started hearing, that it was like over and over again, I never had rats before. What happened? It's gotten so bad. And so we're now going into these emerging neighborhoods to do rat indexing and to try to look at and evaluate emerging hotspots and to kind of leverage what we've learned for neighborhood rat reduction to other areas of the city. All right, that was a lot of talking. And so Brian, I'm hoping I can stop talking for a minute and take some questions, if that's okay.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I see other folks giving you a hand. That was very informative. Thank you, Caroline. Yeah, first there's a few in the chat, and then we'll get to direct questions. Folks can feel free to unmute after that. One direct question I received in the chat from David: how does New York City tackle private property access when you're trying to do the inspections? Many of the issues are not visible from public ways.
Such a good question. We talk about access all the time. I spent all morning talking about access, but we do have strategies. So the health department alone, we don't have authority to go onto someone's property. We will go onto a property, and we have inspectors who are really good at just ringing doorbells. They'll find the super, and then they'll ask, can we come in for an inspection? Sometimes if a property owner or a super knows that there are health code violations, they will deny us access. At that point, we have the option of requesting an interagency inspection. So HPD, which is our partner agency, Housing Preservation and Development, they do have authority to enter other properties. So what we'll do is we'll ask HPD to do a joint inspection with us. We'll go in, we'll do the inspection together, and that way we can gain access to the areas we need to see. The other thing is, through complaints, if someone is complaining about their neighbor and you can see the neighboring property from their property, oftentimes people will let us onto their property to say, view the rear yard of the adjacent property. So that is another strategy that we use quite frequently, where we'll access, somebody will say, here, come into my yard, I'll show you this rear yard, and you can see how bad it is. As long as we have line of sight access, we can write an enforcement order.
Okay, great. Yeah, there's a question about rat poison and potential harm for pets. Do you have any suggestions on what homeowners could buy? And how does that relate? You mentioned carbon monoxide and dioxide.
Yeah. So, well, first and foremost, we recommend that that property owners clean, seal, follow basic IPM steps first. So evaluate the property, understand why rats are coming onto the property, and remove any conditions conducive to rats before treating. And then if once you've taken those steps, if you're in a multifamily building and you have tenants, you may not treat here in New York. You must hire a licensed pest professional. And that licensed pest professional must follow the label for treating. And the label says, baits must be in containers or placed deep down into a rat burrow or inaccessible to pets, children, any non-target animals. So we strongly recommend that homeowners do not do their own pest control. If you are a property owner and you're living in your own home and treating your own home, you don't have tenants and you're not in a public space, you can still buy a rodenticide in New York. But we really don't recommend that people do that if they're dealing with a severe infestation. They should hire a licensed professional who knows what they're doing, and then they should supervise that professional and listen to them. In outdoor spaces where you have the general public using them, like a public park, we are trying to shift the focus over from using second generation anticoagulant rodenticides over to products that may have less residual harm, such as a carbon monoxide treatment through the Burrow RX machine, or carbon dioxide treatment by using rat ice, or Leafitech makes carbon dioxide cylinders. But again, we only use licensed pest professionals for all treatments that we do here in the city.
Okay, great answer. Yeah, so you mentioned some public data that you've collected or that is made available to the public. How do we access that, like the inspection data?
Sure. Good question. So there are a couple ways. One is you can go to the health department's website and just look up rat mitigation zones. We are getting ready to put up a new data set right now. I think you're limited in what you can see, but like keep refreshing that the data's there. It just needs to be posted. So rat mitigation zones on the health department website. You can also look at the rat information portal on the health department's website. And then if you want just data and you don't want to look at all our other stuff, you can go to Open Data and look for rat inspections, not complaints. We really prefer if people use the inspection data. That's when a trained inspector is looking at the property, not just the lay public calling it a complaint.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I noticed that some of your educational materials and the photos were in different languages. Can you talk about where those materials are available like which of your programming is translated and which
Yeah,
is.
our Rat Academy, our community-facing Rat Academy, is available in English and Spanish, and it's on demand so that if we usually partner with a community host. So if, you know, a neighborhood in the South Bronx wants to host an academy, we'll work with them in whatever language they would like to work in. Sometimes we have to hire a translator, but we'll work on making sure that it's language accessible. Um, then the brochures are all in English, Spanish, and Chinese, but the city offers translation on our website. So most of the materials on the RAT portal you can get translated into your own language. If people want to see the materials, they are also free to order by calling 311. If you're a New Yorker, you can call 311 and get packs of our brochures delivered in English, Spanish, or Chinese. If you want to just download the PDF and have it translated on the web, you can do that as well at nyc.gov/rats.
Great. Moira asks, is there best practice for destroying rat burrows in the tree squares or other areas where there's obviously a rat network?
Yes. So, and this is what our stoppage team does. So what we recommend is that we do not like it when people just cover the top of the rat burrow. You know, we see a lot of people, they'll just stick a rock or a bottle on top of it. But what we know is those burrow systems go 1 to 3 feet down. So what we recommend is taking like a sharp shovel or like a pick and completely collapsing and even just like aerating that soil. You can also use a landscaping pebble, like a small, fine gravel. And we just want to completely fill in the entire burrow system. Now, sometimes you'll start to fill it in with a landscaping pebble and you'll see that like a whole 80-pound bag of the stuff will just disappear. There can be big voids underneath. So regularly kind of refilling it, going back, checking to see if the holes reopen is a best practice. If roots from the street tree are lifting the sidewalk up and making a hollow void, then you have to call the Parks Department, and they have a tree. They have like a tree forestry program that will come and trim the roots and make sure that you don't accidentally kill the tree. The only thing we always tell people is please never ever put concrete in a tree bed, and don't try to, you know, you only use a permeable substance when working in a tree. We don't want to accidentally kill any trees.
Mhm. Great. And I think that addressed John's question as well. So I'm going to skip down to Regina. Do you have any experience using the Cheetah handheld carbon monoxide device for rat removal?
No, we haven't used that. For carbon monoxide, we've only used Burrow RX, and we like the Burrow RX tool. And actually, our evaluations of Burrow RX found that repeat visits with a Burrow RX were extremely successful in limiting rat burrows in parks. The Parks Department uses it a lot, and we use it in community gardens. The problem with Burrow RX is that it's smelly, it's large, and it's difficult to move around the city. And so, you know, we've struggled a little bit expanding the use of Burrow RX. But if you are a parks manager, if you are a garden manager, if you're, you know, maintaining a big landscape, it's a great tool to have on hand.
Great, thank you. And I see that Martha answered, your colleague Martha answered one of the questions there. And then I'll maybe take one more here. Does the city ever use dogs for medication?
Don't recommend it. So, you know, of course, you know, you can harvest a couple of rats with a rat terrier, a hawk, snake. You know, they're out there. They're definitely predators to rats. You know, some people still like to believe that feral cat colonies will have some protective effect, but we really don't see that those kind of harvesting efforts work at a neighborhood level. But also, we do canine leptospirosis surveillance, and we don't want our dogs or pets to be exposed to rats, you know, out of concern for their health. So we really don't recommend that program or using that approach. We think good old fashioned neighborhood cleanup is what needs to get done.